Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Integrating Metadata Governance with Erwin DM to improve data quality. I'm actually going to talk about the images you're seeing on the slide, but first I wanted to start with a couple of introductions with our guest speakers that will be on the call with me today. Our first speaker after myself, so I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Robert Ludden. I'm the Vice President of Sandhill Consultants, and I run Sandhill Consultants with my partners in the business. But let me introduce Jeff Harris. He's going to be up as one of our next speakers. Jeff is a enterprise architect, a long-time enterprise architect, in fact, who has been addressing the issues of data modeling, data governance, and the convergence of the two for these several past years. And then I'd also like to introduce a favorite speaker of ours, Marcy Goodwin. Marcy is the founder and CEO of Access Software Designs. And since 1989, Access Software Designs has been providing education consulting services to Fortune 1000 companies and government entities for over the past several years. I won't say how many years, Marcy. But Marcy is a field and expert of enterprise model management infrastructure, and is also co-creator of EM-SOS, which was what we'll also be talking about later on today in the webcast. Marcy's company, Access Software Design, is a valued partner to Sandhill, and together we offer EM-SOS, our metadata management framework, for Erwin to our clients. So let me just ask Jeff and Marcy to say hello.
Hi, Jeff Harris here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Robert. I think you've basically covered all the facts there.
Right, Marcy here.
Marcy,
thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the webinar.
Yeah, so one of the first things we actually wanted to start out with is the screens here that you're seeing and the need for standardization. In a study that was done several years ago by TB, all the different departments, surveillance, TB research, funded development parties, care, regulatory assistance, all define data elements differently. And it wasn't until a standard for the data element came out that all the parties began to use the same definition for the same standard data element that began to fix a problem and saw dramatic improvements in the quality information and obviously the research that was put out there by the organizations. So that's definitely one of the things that we want to be able to articulate throughout the course of the webcast, is that data governance and metadata governance starts from the foundation of modeling tools, but modeling tools that have got a standardized approach, a standardized procedures and forms and articles like that, that will then lead to the eventuality of data quality. And that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of put that graphic up there. So just a little FYI about Sandhill and Access Software Designs. So Sandhill Consultants is a consultancy organization that helps build comprehensive data architectures funded on solid data management practices that can deliver trusted, consistent data, enabling organizations to reduce the risk and achieve compliance. Access Software Designs is a consulting and product development company specializes in the enterprise model managed infrastructure. And in partnership with Sandhill, Access Software delivers EM-SOS, which is a comprehensive metadata management framework based on governance best practices. So let me just go into the agenda. I'm actually going to cover the first couple of slides here, and then I'm going to hand it off to Marcy and Jeff, who are going to be talking about their views on the convergence of data governance and data modeling and how Sandhill and Access Software Designs can actually help. So one of the things we have noticed in the agenda, and we'll cover it briefly, is that data modeling tools are great. And obviously we're going to be focused on Erwin in this particular webcast. But we're actually noticing that with capabilities come limitations. And certainly we want to talk about some of those limitations because they're not really mentioned a lot of the time. So we'll certainly cover that. Then we want to talk about the metadata governance and how the metadata governance comes into the picture and where it comes in and how an organization can leverage that with the modeling tools. We want to show where that integration of governance is and the modeling technology. And then we want to go through and explain how we see metadata meets the governance. With all this comprising of how Erwin and EM-SOS together really deliver that convergence of the data modeling and data governance. And then if we've got time, we'll certainly take some questions. So let's just have a quick review of the data modeling tool capabilities. Most of the folks on this call may be Erwin users. You were the guys that we actually targeted for this webcast. However, this webcast will be represented and replayed, so we may get people that aren't using a modeling tool out there. So the first plug for Erwin is if you don't have a modeling tool, you need a modeling tool. It's one of the foundational aspects of a proper data governance solution is you need a good, strong data modeling tool, and Erwin is definitely one of the leading tools out there. What does the modeling tool do good? It actually graphically represents the data structures. We can no longer remember the whole data structures, in a tabular text format. That's why we paint a picture of it. And the graphical representation helps us understand that, especially as our applications get more complex and larger, and as we go into the area of big data as well. The modeling tools support data dictionaries, maybe singular, maybe plural. These data dictionaries are the foundation for the business glossaries that are out there. So we definitely want to be able to make sure that the tool that we have allows us to build and define data dictionaries. The modeling tools are great for describing the logical business requirements from the data side of the house. So we want to make sure that that requirement is captured and it's modeled in the business. It then facilitates the data design and maintenance into the physical design of the business. And that's where, standards and procedures and policies will play a very strong role into it. Obviously, producing reports, producing customized naming macros, and providing domains for consistent, standardized class words and frequently used attributes are really key in the tool. But what's actually interesting is that, and you'll see this in the next couple of slides, is just because the tool allows you to do this, it doesn't tell you actually how you should do this. And it's the how that is the problem that we're seeing in today's data governance issues, because without a consistent, repeatable process, we're like the previous screen on the TV aspect. We're going to have different standards, different definitions, and when we go to produce the analytics for the organization, we then come up with a chaotic kind of situation. So I do want to talk about the fact that the modeling tools are very good for doing that. However, what we wanted to really also address, and this is the first time we really kind of come up and address this, is that the tools that you're using today are great, but they've got critical limitations too. It is really easy for multiple resources, multiple departments, multiple teams to easily create metadata. However, if that metadata is not standardized, then you will end up creating multiple conflicting data structures, which we have seen, and most organizations will actually, confirm that they have multiple duplicate data structures that they have produced conflict or absent data definitions. I can't tell you how many organizations we talk to that tell me that they've got the zip code, which is supposed to be a standard way of defining it, defined 32 different times was one organization. And a zip code, and you figure, well, it's either 5 or 9 digits, depending on how the U.S. defines it. So we definitely see conflicting and or the absence of data object definitions because the tool will allow you to do it. This relates to a decreased reliability and trustworthy of the metadata. And again, one of the things we're trying to do is, your business is going to be trying to produce analytics, which is going to be trying to produce that off the metadata that you're producing, and the tools will allow you to produce duplicate metadata. It'll allow you to say, well, okay, you can produce this object or definition or data element in one library, one model is the same as the next data element, and the definition may be different. Obviously, this creates unwanted redundancy. It eliminates the whole concept of reusability, and it will produce a process of no checks and balances. And that's where we think that there has to be a solution. We can no longer continue to accept the way we currently develop our systems without some kind of major changes in the structure. We want to get better at doing this, not worse. And so when we look at how we can help an organization achieve governance for modeling tools, and we talk to a lot of CDOs out there that talk about, I'm all about data governance. Data governance is top of mind. We want to be able to address data governance with a tool, and we're going to go, great. So we would then assume that if you're after changing data governance, that your modeling environment, you've got all that addressed. For example, in your modeling environment, you've got the fact that you've developed and established your data modeling life cycles, that you've developed and are used and are enforcing your standards and procedures, and that you are getting the reusability of the data structures, that you're actually able to monitor and measure the actual reuse in the organization, and that you've got documented best practices, and it is communicated and easily accessible. When we go through that list of activities and say that before you get to your high-level data governance and the data governance tools, your absolutely foundation pinning for this has to be all done. Do you have all that? And we get clients go, I'm not sure I have most of that. And that's where we come in and say, this is mandatory. When you're talking about data governance, these are the things that you need to be able to put in place. And these don't come with a modeling tool. The tool allows you to develop them. The problem is, how do you develop them? Who's got the time? Who's going to do that? And that's what we're going to talk about. When we're putting this presentation together, we really looked at, the ability of the modeler and the responsibility that comes with a modeler and using a tool. And if a tool is not governed by the supporting foundation, i.e. a strong data governance framework that we will certainly have a look at, then how can the organization produce reliable, standardized, reusable metadata? How can it develop repeatable, streamlined processes and bring consistency to the data model life cycles? We are looking to make sure that the organization can stand up and can be part of the data governance to actually provide documentation to guide the metadata development and maintenance. And a key critical aspect that we're going to come forward and talk about is the fact that, if you don't have a way to enforce the standards and procedures and the data governance that you've developed, then you will not be able to enforce what you think you've got designed. And that's where we want to be able to leverage a tool like Erwin, which has the capability, but you need to actually tell it. And this is where we actually get into the data governance with modeling technology. So we're actually going to take what governance looks at, and governance says, I've got to have my policies, I've got to have the standards, I've got to have the procedures, I've got to have the roles, and I've got to have the measures. And all those are great, and we expect that. That's part and parcel of saying that, yeah, we're governance, we're looking at data governance. But if these features are not implemented and not enforced in the modeling tool, then all you have is a nice bookshelf that has got some dusty policy, standards, procedures that are not getting measured and not getting implemented, and you end up with the same kind of issues that you've had before. You've got to leverage the modeling tools and the technology within the modeling tools, marry them with the best practices and guidelines that either you've developed or can develop, or you can actually acquire through EM-SOS, to map to the organization's policy, standards, and procedures, and then implement and measure that. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at. Here's a standard workflow that we normally see an organization tell us that, yep, I've got my governance policy, I've got my procedure, I've got my standard, I've got my metadata, and obviously I want to monitor that. So that's a typical life cycle for data governance and model management. What we are actually doing is we're actually taking that policy and applying it to the modeling tool set. So we take the definitions and we put them into guidelines or procedures or instructions in how to actually implement that policy in a data modeling tool. So therefore, we can actually show a correlation to the actual documented policy from stewardship or roles and responsibilities and show how we're actually implementing in the tool set. We then go into adopting the procedures and how we can actually create consistent, repeatable steps in the tool set which can accomplish the modeling activities which map to the procedures. We can't get anywhere with the standards that are inbuilt into the tool set, the standards for the naming convention, standards for the size, the standards for the metadata that will produce the quality and reliability. Obviously, it's all about the metadata, and, if an organization can get the policy and can get the procedures and can get the standards and can automate in that tool, then they will start to produce trustworthy, reusable data structures, and we're going to have a look at that. And then there's the final part, which is an ongoing approach of monitoring the metadata quality. In fact, this is where we actually talk about, data modeling is not a project by project, situation. It's actually a program that needs to be implemented, and it needs to be implemented as part of this whole data governance and model management approach. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Marcy and Jeff talk a little bit more about how we can actually marry the governance policies, procedures, and standards that an organization may have, because we would expect everyone on this call to obviously have some kind of documented standards and procedures. But what we want to do is we want to talk about how you can actually implement them into your modeling tools, such as Erwin data modeling, and how you really can gain control of that enterprise metadata management. So I'm going to be able to click through the slides. So Marcy, why don't I pass it over to you to talk about the first one?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Marcy here. So what we'd like to do is just give you a brief introduction to EM-SOS, Enterprise Management Set of Standards. We have been dealing with management infrastructures for a long time. And what we realized was that most people really do understand the need for standards, procedures, whatever. But the organizations typically don't either have the resources or those who have the expertise to write this, or they just don't have the time. I mean, everybody's already doing a full-time job. So we also realized that the data modeling tools, as Robert has said, have certain capabilities that we all understand and that we use from day to day. But it's sort of like having too many people play in the sandbox. There's only so much that these tools can do to help us with governance. And so it was kind of our mission to create a framework that could be used in conjunction with Erwin, using the best of Erwin's capabilities to help us bring some governance right into the creation of the metadata process. Let's go to the next slide, please, Robert. Great. So we're going to get into some specifics here about how Erwin, excuse me, and EM-SOS can work together. Next slide. Great. So I know that these screenshots are small. Bear with us. We're not here to give you a demo. We just want to give you an idea of what this framework looks like and how it works with Erwin. So we've created EM-SOS. What you're looking at is the main page here. This is implemented in SharePoint. We also have an HTML version, but with SharePoint, we have certain advantages that we have. We're going to be going into a couple of screenshots specifically how they relate to Erwin. But if it's possible for you to see, and forgive the minimal size of all of this, but again, it's just to give you an idea. It's really the concepts that we care more about during this presentation. But we do have on the left the index of what's in EM-SOS. And then on the right side, where you happen to see a logo at the moment, but on the right side is where the content appears. So whenever you click down on something in the index on the left, you're going to see the content on the right. We have categories here of standards, procedures, templates, reports, and so forth, guidelines. These are all major categories, and everything that is needed for a successful modeling environment that incorporates the company's governance goals is all written here. So let me say up front, this is to give everyone a huge jump start on building a framework. Let me make it clear that we're not selling a methodology here. What we wanted to do was give you everything that was written from a point of view of reusability, structure, ongoing changes, and so forth, everything that we know that modeling environment brings to us. So that our motto here is always that it's easier to edit and delete than it is to create something from a blank page. So our concept here is to write everything out with really robust standards, procedures, guidelines, and so forth, so that it's very easy for somebody to say, okay, I can now tailor this to my specific environment. So that's kind of what we're starting with here. Next slide, please. Great. So this first section at the very top, if you can see, it's highlighted in that purple color on the left in the index, is the data model life cycle. What's important at a very high level for bringing governance into your environment is that you have to have your life cycles strategized. You have to have a strategy for how am I going to build these models, what's going to happen to them, what is their life cycle, and so forth. You know, now it's typical that a company is going to have more than one life cycle. You might be doing new development and going from a logical to a physical to a database. You might be doing some re-engineering for a different project and bring a database information into a physical model. And perhaps you might even be using that physical model to retrofit logical information into it. Erwin allows you to do all of that. And it also allows you to make connections between these models, essentially build referential integrity between the models and so forth. So that you can keep track of the different changes and so forth. You can do impact analysis, whatever. But in order to be able to come up with the way you want Erwin to build these things, you have to have a strategy. And certainly we're not going to go through these diagrams, but there are probably 8 to 10 diagrams that we've built that give you the basic idea of how the process will work. And the only thing I'm going to show you here at the very top, of course, says Enterprise Data Modeling Standards and Procedures. And underneath that, we have what we're calling Global Shared Data Objects. These are the reusable objects. So the point is that for all of these diagrams, these can be customized, they can be changed. But generically speaking, what we care about from a governance point of view is having Erwin be able to create, to have reusable objects that have been approved and be able to track them, reuse them so that we can get some consistency and standardization throughout. So this whole DMLC section has all of these different diagrams and so forth. Next slide, please. Great. So most of you probably do know that Erwin has these 3 model types, the logical physical, the classical, we have a logical, we have a physical. So we have the ability to build all of these, but what we need to do is make sure that with the freedom that we have to create any combination of these models for whatever purposes that we may have, it's really important in terms of governance that we be able to ensure the quality of the content in these models, that they're standardized and so forth, as well as understanding the relationship that these models have from one to the next. Next slide, please. Okay, so Erwin has something called a design layer architecture. This is really how we implement whatever strategy for governance that we have. We determine the strategies, we implement them in Erwin via the derive and the split and the add model source functionality, so that if we use that functionality from Erwin in conjunction with the strategies, then the models can be synchronized with changes. So this makes governance of the metadata extremely viable. We can keep everything in track. We can understand the change control. We can push out those changes to the models that are using it, so that everybody's on the same page. Everybody is starting off with standardized metadata structures, and then we can manage those changes as we go. So we're starting to bring in what I like to call all of the outliers in terms of models. It starts to bring organizational structure into it, so that everybody's not just creating models, doing their own thing, and even worse, taking bits and pieces from possible models that have been created before, but have never gone through an approval process and so forth, so that we start to replicate not only incorrect or missing definitions potentially, but we replicate incorrect data across models moving forward. So this is something that we look at, we come up with the strategy, and then we use the Erwin functionality to maintain that. Next slide, please. We have a lot of standards that are already written. EM-SOS has all of the standards and procedures in it already written for what I call a successful model management environment. The left hand knows what the right hand is doing. We can share models. We can use them. We can count on the fact that we are getting the same definitions. We don't have customer in one model, client in another, but they mean the same thing. They may have the same types of attributes, different definitions, different data types, and so forth. This is the kind of Wild West modeling environment that is completely the opposite of what we want in the way of managing the metadata from a governance point of view. So as you can see, I just want to point out here that we're looking at a screen that shows the logical data objects that are in Erwin, but we have physical data objects in here as well. The important thing to note here is that the content on the right, you see these bullets. These bullets they all represent a property that needs to be documented, that needs to have a standard. Now, in this case, if you look at the very top under standard on the right, it says initial case. Well, in your environment, you may have for an attribute that they're all caps. So we can go in here and we can change this to all caps. The idea being, again, that we're saying this is everything that you need to have documented. And then if what is here isn't to your liking, isn't the way you're doing it there, then it's easy to make that change. Okay, Robert, next slide, please. Great, I am going to call on Jeff. Jeff, why don't you give everybody an idea of how this actually works from the documentation in EM-SOS into Erwin?
Yes, thanks, Marcy. Quite rightfully put by Marcy, one of the key challenges, it's all very nice to be able to come up with your standards, to document them, but the rubber meets the road when you actually physically implement it in your Erwin data modeling environment. So the first question is, how do you actually get that right? So one of the key things, we've got a lot of tools available to us in Erwin, and when we start trying to implement these standards, the first thing that we need to always bear in mind is things like templates. Now, templates help us to be able to define these standards, makes it easier for reuse and to be able to use it on an ongoing basis and to keep it updated. So we use these templates to be able to roll out our standards. And it gives us a good head start on most of our modeling exercises. So the minute we start a new model, we don't have to start reinventing the wheel from the beginning, because our standards are actually built into that template. And from that, we can actually then use the template to be able to achieve a faster, quicker way of implementing our modeling practice. So typically, as you can see there on the screen, is we've taken just those key points that Marcy was talking about, and we've had a look at it. So one of the standards says our case needs to be initial case. So as you can see here, a typical model that has been used or generated using the standards, and you can start seeing how it's actually implemented the initial case standard. And things like the length and all of those sort of things, we're going to come to those on the next slide. So Robert, if you can move to the next slide. So here we go one step further, and we are now defining not only just those initial case setups, but these are actually the way we actually be able to enforce those type of rules. So as you'll see on the bottom right-hand screen there, is we've got the model naming options. So this is a screen built in Erwin that allows you to be able to define these standards. So these standards have been defined using what we know as macros. So by using these macros, it then can adjust your case, your lengths, any of that information that you want, and apply it to your standards. So if you need to prefix things, suffix it, you can do all that through your macros quite effectively. The top screen on the right-hand side, you'll notice this is where we can actually define things like your case as well. Now, bear in mind, we can actually do case in two different places, one in the macro and a blanket approach on an object level. And bear in mind, this is just the logical screen. You have a separate physical to the logical, so you can actually define different standards for logical and physical. Marcy alluded to that earlier as well in the discussion. But you can also define things like your maximum lengths in this screen and define it. So this is where we're setting up all of this information in our template so that it's all reusable. So you don't have to go and do this each time. Even to the point, and as you can see on the left-hand screenshot, is the principles of using things like your glossaries. So when we start talking about abbreviations and how we want to apply our abbreviations in our modeling environment, then this is where we define our abbreviations. So as you can see from the line that's actually selected, address gets abbreviated to ADDR. So we can then have all of these standards in place for our modeling exercises. And the beauty of working with our templates is you don't have to go and redefine these every time you start a data model. They're already there. So by using this, we now instantiation of our standards that we've actually developed in the EM-SOS environment. So whatever you set there, you define it in your template and then roll it out. Next slide, Robert. So as I was talking about a little bit about how we do this, just a couple of key points about glossaries, which are abbreviations. They provide us an enterprise-wide metadata of information, and we can create them and maintaining them in our models by using the templates, which then get rolled down to each of the models. So as you update your enterprise-wide glossaries, then you can actually then roll that out to each of your models that have been attached to the templates. And typically your glossary captures things like your business terminology, any business rules, the definitions that you're applying to it, and any standard abbreviations and acronyms. So it goes a little bit more than just a glossary. We haven't touched much on the aspect of domains, how that fits into this picture, but we're just trying to give you a bit of a taste of the understanding how EM-SOS, even though it sets our standards and defines how we're supposed to do our data modeling from the standard sides and also the procedures, but how we can actually implement that in an Erwin environment. So giving us the standardization across all of our models and giving us also technical compliance within our Erwin tool. And I'm going to hand back to Marcy as we go to the next slide.
You know, Jeff, I should have given you more slides to talk to because I love your accent. So now they're just going to have to listen to me again. So a word or two about processes. It's always surprising to me when we go on client site or whatever. I mean, everyone knows that you need some standards. We never go anywhere where they don't have standards for entities and attributes and all the main, certainly the logical, big data objects, if you will, and how they name tables and columns and so forth. But what's always surprising to me is that the vast majority of the folks that we work with don't have documented processes. How do you create a model, and what does it do, and how do you do change control and all of that? Typically, they're either not there and documented, or they're doing it a way in which they did it possibly from a previous older version of Erwin, so they didn't have some of the capabilities then that they did now, and they could be doing it in a way that's easier for folks. Sometimes we get, you know, pre-merger methods or whatever, policy changes and so forth. But honestly, processes are the other half of standards. They are certainly as important as metadata standards, and they don't get enough credit in my book. So there are a handful, a certain amount, minimally, of processes that really need to be followed and to be standardized and used by everybody that's doing the modeling process. When we get folks doing standardized processes, then we get a much more efficient way of managing the models, of knowing where they are in their life cycle. We can have Erwin functionality be maximized to do these procedures, so that we can ask the tool basically to do as much of the heavy lifting on this as we possibly can. In writing these processes or procedures, we want to make them as simple as possible. Everybody's busy, and truly the real purpose of doing data modeling is to get the analysis right. We are trying to standardize material that's critical to the organization. So we want to make these processes as time effective and as easy for the modeler or the reviewer as possible. They have to be documented in a consistent format, and they've got to be in the same place so that everybody knows where they are. They can easily find them and so forth. We don't have to worry about the one person who knows how to do something being on vacation. Next slide, please. A quick look. Of course, we have all the procedures that are necessary, and these procedures are written around doing them in Erwin. At the moment, we're looking at logical model submission and deliverables, meaning we will submit a logical model for approval, make sure it's to standard and so forth, make sure that the reusable objects are being used properly or changed if necessary through that process before the model goes physical. So that's a particular process that we're looking at here. But all of the necessary procedures for both Erwin as well as Erwin's Mart Server are written here. The Mart Server, some of you may have this repository, some of you may not, but it plays a key role in a workgroup environment. And yet there are standards, of course, in terms of setting up profiles and what we call libraries, which is the way the Mart organizes its information internally. So there are certain standards and procedures that are required for the Mart as well. So that's also in the list here. Let's take a look at this template, which is that all the templates in EM-SOS are written the same. You'll have a purpose statement. Sandhill in particular is also an education company. And so it's important to all of us to be able to say, why are you doing this? We don't want to just come in with the attitude that we're telling you to do something that isn't necessary. So there's a purpose statement that explains the standard or procedure, who's responsible for it. Of course, that can be customized. And then the description, the actual standard or procedure itself. Robert, if you click again, that would be great. And I want to show you the other part of the template. Click again, Robert, and we'll bring up another window here. It should. There you go. So we're looking at another process. This is model creation and population. In Erwin, we can create a model from scratch. We can do it from a template. We can derive a model. We can add a model source. We have a lot of different ways, and they have different implications in terms of referential integrity to other models and so forth. When we want to bring in reusable objects that we keep in a particular model for reuse or whatever, how do we do that? So there are processes here that explain, well, you would do it this way if you are trying to achieve a logical model, do it this way if you're in physical, whatever it might be. So that's all explained here via this procedure. But I did want to just point out that in the window on the right, you know that there's a purpose, a responsibility, a description, but there's a couple of other sections in this template. We have a tips section. Mostly this is about Erwin functionality, things that we've learned about the tool that we've worked with that kind of give you a heads up on possibly an easier way to do something about this procedure or whatever. That's hard-won information. It could also just be about the process itself, whatever. And then underneath that, there's a revision history. This is how we get an audit trail. This is how we know how our metadata has changed, when it's changed, and so forth. This is particularly helpful, useful for our financial customers, our folks in healthcare where regulations and so forth are really critical and are definitely audited. So this gives us a way in which we can say when that metadata changed and whatever. Okay, next slide. Jeff, why don't you talk to folks about this workflow and let them know how this works?
Okay, I think one of the key things, and I mean, Marcy's been talking a lot about the importance of having the processes in place, the repeatability of the processes. How do we be able to maintain and reuse those processes on a regular basis? And one of the things that EM-SOS also brings to the table is a workflow engine. This is just a typical example of the logical model submission and deliverables workflow. But the key thing that we're trying to show here and we're trying to point out is we've got this workflow engine that can take your workflow, so it will actually repeat your process for you. So you define in the actual process what the stages are that you got to go through. And this allows you to be able to maintain and manage your models as they go through this particular process. And it gives you this all the checks and balances that you need to make sure that the right people have actually seen the model and reviewed it and are happy with it before you can go to the next stage. So through that, we can actually have this whole process. And the workflow engine is, obviously it's a customizable aspect because it has to be able to tailor into the process that you're using. It needs to be able to operate under the grounds of what your requirements are. So a typical workflow like this one here might state, have you made sure that all of your attributes are initial case? Do they all conform to a length or anything like that? So all of those standards that you've got and the process that you've put in front of it to be able to manage it comes together in the workflow engine to be able to go through that process to make sure that you are complying to your standards and your process. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Marcy for the next slide.
Okay, so EM-SOS was written around a very important key governance issue, which is the ability to trust the metadata that everyone is using. We are using the same definitions for the same named things and so forth. So these reusable data structures are very important, and the strategy about all the processes and so forth that we've written cross-reference this need for reusability. It's the quality of the metadata that we're looking for here. We can all build these models, and typically what we see is a model will be built for one project. The next project comes along, another model will be built. Maybe they'll take some pieces here, take some pieces there, whatever. Every time that happens, we are running the risk of getting further away from standardization and from metadata that we can trust. So we kind of want to, we want to build the dike correctly. We don't want to stick our finger in it and keep putting bandages on it. So these reusable data structures, once they have gone through a vetting process, we can then save a whole lot of time and effort and money, because we are not reinventing these things. We're not, saying, okay, well, Mary used this version of customer, but I think I need James's version instead, or whatever. We're starting to, as I like to say, make sense out of nonsense, bring all of this stuff together, have a clear, precise data structure that has approved properties in it, and that therefore moving forward, we can start with those and use them and make it a much more efficient environment, okay? We want to prevent not only the creation of multiple conflicting yet same structures, customer being defined differently in different models, or customer and client being the same, whatever that might be. We want to prevent the creation of that, but even as importantly, we don't want to keep moving those on in every future model. We don't want to keep replicating the incorrect metadata or the conflicting metadata that we already have. So I think, yes, the other thing I wanted to mention about this is that these reusable structures are valuable, not only for the logical and the physical objects that we have, but in Erwin, we've got these wonderful domains, which unfortunately a lot of folks who use Erwin either don't know how to use them, aren't really aware of their power. So we have these Erwin domains, which bring a huge level of consistency and standardization if they're used properly. They've changed control for our class words and so forth extraordinarily easy because they have inheritance. One of the few things in Erwin that does have inheritance, but we can make a global change on domains, and every model will get updated and so forth. So they're very powerful. And we also have UDPs in Erwin, user-defined properties, which are really valuable and which are also considered to be reusable objects. So there are specific things that we can manage, certain objects in Erwin that are very easy to create as reusable objects, and to be able to have the benefit of everybody being able to use them, and taking a lot of that time and pressure off of the individual modelers to have to keep either inventing this stuff or going to search someplace in some model to try and find it. Next slide, please. Great. You're looking at a process that we have here that's called data object promotion. So this is the process that says at the end of a project, when you're getting your model approved, you may have some entities in there that are candidates for becoming a reusable object so that the whole enterprise can use them. So this is the process that says, is this object promotable, basically, into being reusable? So the process is written here. Robert, if you click again. Right. So here's a diagram that very early on, when I talked about the data model lifecycle diagrams, here's the diagram for the reusable data structures. this is how it happens. So there's a process by which we go through the candidacy of an object to see whether it can be approved to be reusable and so forth. We classify it. Of course, some objects, especially on the physical side, will be local only. They're used just for that particular application or whatever. So this is a diagram that shows the overall view of how this process works. But you can kind of think of the fact that for each line that is between each of these objects, there's a process that's related to this that tells you how to do it. And that's what we're looking at in the process section of the data object promotion. Those are all the real how-tos, where the rubber meets the road, of how do we actually do this. So we've done this in quite a few cases where you're looking at a process that's possibly a little more involved in something else. We will have a diagram that gives you the overview, and then we'll have the process itself. And again, this can all be customized based on the way your particular organization wants to do it. I think that what I'm going to do now is hand this off to Jeff, because much of this is made easier when we store things like reusable objects in the Mart. And so with that in mind, Robert, if you would click forward, and Jeff, I'm going to let you talk about the Mart for a little bit. And thank you all.
Okay, thanks, Marcy. You know, the Mart Server, for those that aren't familiar with the Mart Server, it's the Erwin Workgroup Edition, which allows the storage of your models in a repository. It also brings lots of other features like your versioning and all that information. But there's specific functionality that we wanted to point out to you that helps you with this data model lifecycle that you are working towards, which comes from the EM-SOS side. But it gives you the ability to be able to have separate libraries for storing your different types of assets that you are using. So we've spoken about templates. We also talk about reusable models or objects in models and things like that to be able to use in your design layer architectures, in your template-driven architectures, all of this. So you can actually structure things nicely in an easy manner to be able to reuse. So somebody who joins your company goes through EM-SOS to understand the procedures and likewise can get access to all the right information they need to be able to start doing the data modeling. And using these libraries, you can have subfolders in the library, so you can actually sub-categorize things. So you can organize it all in a very well-structured way. The most important thing that also comes with the Workgroup Edition as well, the Mart Server, is also controlling things like who has access to what. So by defining your profiles and setting up your permissions for the different users and the different environments, and leveraging this library structure, you can have people that have access to certain areas, other areas they don't. So typically, like example, your template, we talk about the library that holds your templates. They need to be able to use it, but they may not have permission to be able to update the models there. But anything in their working for libraries, they need to be able to update. So you can actually manage who can do what in what spaces and have the right people having access to be able to update the template models and therefore being able to manage these standards going forward. So if a new abbreviation gets introduced, that it's gone through the right process and been approved. Then last important point around this, you know, EM-SOS does give you a foundation to work from and defines how these library structures are to be set up, how you manage the profiles and the versioning. So all of that's been defined in your EM-SOS environment. Robert, can you go to the next slide? Now, another key aspect that we often look at is it's all very nice and neat to have our processes and have our standards, but we need to be able to measure them. And by generating our measures and metrics, which is one of the reporting functionalities that you'll see in EM-SOS, we can then measure it and understand how mature our environment is, how consistent we are using our standards, and give us traceability to where we got the information, why do we use it, etc. So using all of our templates, our design architectures, all of that, how do we actually measure how effective have we been in our organization in using it? So these reports, these metrics give us an understanding how consistently we're using it to be able to get to a high level of reuse and being able to achieve our standards in our environment. So that's all built into EM-SOS and obviously tailors to your specific requirements of your standards. Robert, next slide, please. And likewise, when we start talking about metrics and that lot, we need to be able to communicate. And one of the things that we've just highlighted quickly here for you is within the communication aspect, we communicate by using our workflows. So once we use our workflows, we then send out information to say that a model is ready for review. What has been changed? So as you can see, and if Robert can swing to the next slide for me as well, we can see how this actually tailors back in to our standards, our EM-SOS processes, and how do we communicate that? And using the full breadth of the workflow engine, as you can see there's a lot of communication going on. We can have discussions. We can even attach documents. So if you've got a specific document that needs to be attached to the workflow, example, a change request, then all of that can be input into the EM-SOS system. So through that, we've got a very powerful engine to be able to deal with this. And to take us to the next step, I'm going to hand back to Robert, and he can close off for us of the presentation.
Hey, thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Marcy. I wanted to just kind of come back to the key point that hopefully we've been able to communicate to our audience, which is there are great things that the Erwin data modeling tool will provide enough functionalities out of the box. Great graphical representation of the data structure, supports data dictionaries, describes logical and business physical requirements, facilitates the data design and maintenance, customized naming macros and templates, provides Erwin domains for consistent classified class words and frequently used attributes, and UDPs for additional documentation. However, it must be made clear that data modeling tools also have limitations. There is no inherent strategy for creating standardized metadata. That's where hopefully you'll see that EM-SOS comes in the picture. There is no inherent strategy for eliminating multiple conflicting data structures. That's where you have to put those proper standards, procedures, and processes in place. Nor can the tool prevent conflicts arising from absent data object definitions. That's where, when Jeff was talking about the workflow, you can actually have that as part of your workflow. All of these conditions will ensure reliable, trustworthy metadata, which is the goal of the organization and the goal of data governance. By ensuring trustworthy metadata, you can prevent unwanted redundancy, but not if you don't have your standardized metadata definitions like we saw on the first slide. Our objective is to help organizations create usability. We want to ensure that the processes that are being managed and they've got checks and balances, and we want to ensure that there's a communication that the enterprise can use regarding change control. In order to do that, we believe that a framework for change management and governance is needed. Now, it doesn't mean that you've got to acquire one from Sandhill, but we are recommending, if you do not have one, that you've got a metadata management framework that is critical for the successful implementation and control of metadata that's created during the modeling process, a framework that ensures the consistency, reusability, and management of the company's metadata. Of course, you know, we're actually coming out with, as Marcy said earlier on, we can actually jumpstart that program. So if you don't have a program that has got data quality life cycles, or if you feel that your standards are not up to your appropriate levels, or if you feel that your organization is missing processes to allow you to develop repeatable structures, and you're looking to develop and get more out of your modeling tool, you're looking to define measures and metrics that you can communicate to the organization and that you can have a centralized communication mechanism, then we have got a framework for you. Just quickly in summarizing, I know we're running over a couple of minutes, when Jeff and Marcy showed the enterprise management modeling environment, the benefit is that it saves time, money, and effort because you're using pre-built components and procedures and guidelines that we have developed for you. In establishing the metadata lifecycles, the benefit is EM-SOS provides end-to-end integrity and integrated quality control and the processes to ensure the quality data model output. And that's critical. That's what we were trying to achieve. When we talked about metadata quality control standards, EM-SOS provides parameters for producing consistent quality definitions of formats and increases interoperability. Not only that, it also can enforce the tools and standards and procedures as well. There's a repeatable workflow, repeatable process and workflow, which will reduce training time and increase consistency. We've defined metrics and measures within the modeling tool, which provides reports to monitor the quality control process so you can actually show your management that quality is increasing and defects are going down, and obviously a centralized communication mechanism, which decreases confusion and enables efficient enterprise-wide communication. Where do you start? So one of the first things we say is that, you know, we would probably recommend an EM-SOS assessment where we would come in and assess your existing in-house resources, your knowledge, your standards, your procedures, where they're at, where they're documented. We'll assess and evaluate your existing material, and from that point, we can then determine a strategy. You know, we might be able to use some of the stuff that you've already got there. We can then advise whether you build or buy a metadata framework. You know, it depends upon the resource availability, the in-house expertise, and of course, we can come up with an estimate of how much that will cost and how long that will take. We've got several customers that have gone through this process that have come out the other end and be able to leverage their EM-SOS framework, and they're quite happy with that and the benefits provided. And with that, I'm going to actually wrap it up here. I'll ask if there's any questions that anyone's got, that you can email them to us at the following email address. And we certainly look forward to helping any organization that is interested in adopting and developing and creating an enterprise metadata management framework for which EM-SOS can be that jumpstart. So Jeff and Marcy, I'd like to thank you both for your time. Great information is being imparted there. And to our audience, both now and in the future, we look forward to hearing from you, and thank you very much indeed for attending.